the way we actually discovered leucine and the branch chain amino acids was actually we were doing a carbohydrate study. We were actually doing it for Gatorade. And what we found is at the end of these elite cycle power studies was that the branch chain amino acid in the blood dropped like a rock. And we thought, what in the world does that do? And so we then looked at protein synthesis and saw it fell off after these exhaustive exercises. And that's where the whole concept of leucine supplementation and mTOR and EIF4 came from. There have been great reviews. There's one by Stu Phillips. There's been 2 or 3 in the last 3 years. And they overwhelmingly show that protein does not cause kidney problems. In fact, all of the direct studies show that kidney actually enhances renal function. It enhances the glomerular filtration rate, the rate of clearance. It makes the kidney more efficient. It's kind of like saying, you shouldn't exercise because it makes your heart work harder. Protein makes your kidney more functional. Protein in general requires more fluid. One of the things we always saw in our weight loss studies, particularly with women, is we would take them from fairly low protein diets to higher, and they would often experience constipation in the first week or so. And that's really a dehydration issue. The protein just is hyperosmotic. It will draw water to it. You just have to be conscious that you're going to need more fluids to go with it. I mean, kidney, liver, GI tract are all very efficient in handling protein, but what you have to realize is it might require an adaptation period. So if you go from somebody who's consuming 60 or 70 grams per day and you want to get them up to 150, you should do that over a week to 2 week period, because all of those enzymes, all of those things have to adapt. So if you just take a person who's eating 60 and you give them 150 grams, there's a good chance you're going to see some ammonia in the blood, or you're going to see some diarrhea. You're going to see problems because it just takes the body time to adapt all of those digestive enzymes and the liver enzymes for the urea cycle and the kidney extract. All of those things have to adapt to the new normal. The thermic effect of protein is somewhere around 15 to 20% of calories will be wasted as energy, where with carbohydrate and fat, it's around 5%. So there's a real difference in a thermic effect, and not to even mention the satiety effect is higher than carbohydrate. So from a calorie control standpoint, substituting protein for carbohydrate is always a huge benefit in terms of calorie control. Having all of your protein in a single large meal will have less thermic effect than having it in multiple meals that reach these thresholds. So again, I think distribution is important, but we have to understand that the distribution isn't based just on making it distributed evenly. It's based on how many times are you reaching these leucine thresholds of 3 grams or more. I mean, that's the key. What we found and others is that if you give a protein meal, you'll run muscle protein synthesis for about 2.5 hours. And then it's kind of refractory for stimulation. If just giving more protein on top of it doesn't really seem to make much difference. And so we always recommend that for the efficiency, you should space your protein meals at least 4 to 5 hours apart, because that allows for all of the mechanisms to reset, the ATP to come back into balance, and you can sort of redo it again. For example, we know that mTOR requires somewhere around 3 grams to really stimulate mTOR, 3 grams of leucine. And so if, for example, you're having a small meal, like a lunch meal that only has 15 grams of protein and might only have 1.5 grams of leucine, if you put in another 1.5 grams of leucine, you can make that meal act like it's 30 grams of protein. So supplementing one in a small meal, and in that case, I would always supplement all 3 branch chains. You should probably never just supplement leucine alone. You should probably always supplement all 3 of them, because they metabolize together. You need to be up in the 1.6 grams per kg of protein, and that's kind of high for a lot of the keto diet. So I've not seen any particular data that makes me believe that keto diets are more sparing than, a more protein-centric thinking about. On higher protein diets, you tend to see more urinary calcium. And so people jump to the idea that the acidity was causing bone loss. But when people like Kerstetter and others looked at it, what they found was that protein greatly increases calcium absorption. So you're going from calcium absorption of around 20% of dietary calcium to over 40%. And so you just have to excrete more in the urine because you've got more than you can use. All of the data from any of the fracture data, any of the sort of acute bone changes all show that higher protein diets are beneficial. What people sort of mistake is they sort of think, well, bone is a mineral thing. Well, bone is really a protein thing. It's a protein matrix that has to be formed first. And then what we do is deposit minerals on top of that matrix to give it structure or give it rigidity. But protein or muscle, bone first and foremost is a protein structure. And just like muscle protein turnover, bone has a protein turnover, and we have to support it. So I think sarcopenia and osteoporosis are the same disease. They're basically lack of resistance exercise and lack of protein. They're not lack of calcium. I saw some data just last week about of young women in the United States with all this plant-based discussion that 20% of women in the 16 to 26 range are below the EAR. They're below 0.66 grams per kg. So those are frank deficiency symptoms. And 20% of women in the United States. I mean, that's kind of a frightening number. It's not about an even distribution at all. It's about how many meals per day do you want to hit these leucine thresholds. And I personally like a rather uneven distribution. I personally try and get 45 grams in breakfast. My lunch might be 20. My dinner might be 65. So I'm up and down. I like to push the upper limit of protein at a meal, and I like to have a high level in my first meal, and I kind of like having a meal that's a little lower. I like it being variable, but I'm getting at least 2 meals per day that are greatly exceeding that leucine threshold. For most adults, I would like to see it in the 1.2 to 1.6. For endurance athletes, sort of in that more 1.6 kind of range, and strength athletes, 1.6 to 2.2. I think those are totally normal ranges for those kinds of individuals. My university email is simply dlayman@illinois.edu.